Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mirage Talk. Today we have a very special speaker, and for introducing that special speaker, Mike Lefkovich is going to introduce him, and we're going to conduct it in an interview form, so it's not going to be just like a webinar, but more of an interview. If you have questions, because this is a recorded version, you can channel all the questions to Avraham through the Mirage Talk email or website. So Mike, please take over.
Thank you, Eli. My privilege to introduce Avraham MT, has been my dear friend, my teacher, my mentor for over 20 years. Avraham is President Emeritus of Hillel, the foundation of Jewish campus life. He has invested a lifetime in building Jewish identity and strengthening the state of Israel. He's considered by many to be one of the most important and influential Jewish educators of our time, founder and director of a number of innovative educational institutions, currently serves as a consultant to the Reut Institute. In 1970, Avraham founded Melitz, a nonprofit educational service institution that fosters Jewish identity, rooted in pluralistic understanding of Jewish life and the centrality of Israel. He stood at the helm of Melitz for 30 years. He also has served as the chairman of the board of Israel Experience Limited, an independent company created by the Jewish Agency. He is a major contributor to Birthright. Avraham served as the first international director and led the planning process, which created one of the most successful and formative educational programs in the Jewish world. In 2003, he was appointed president and international director of Hillel, Foundation for Jewish Campus Life, and served in that capacity until September of 2006. He's one of the most sought-after speakers in the Jewish world. His 2018 book, A Passion for a People, is a must-read for every person who seeks to better understand what being Jewish is. With that, Avraham, I'm going to ask you a number of questions, and then, as Eli said, we're going to have an opening to outside audience questions as well. First question, Avraham, you've spoken about your career journey and how each stop has learned new insights into the Jewish world. Could you please share some of those insights with us?
Thank you very much for the introduction, Mike. And good evening, all the people on the Mirage Talk. I'm very honored to have been asked to appear here. Just like everyone else on this call, I am a product of the experiences in my life. Everyone else is also a product of their experiences. My experience has been a very interesting journey through the Jewish world. I grew up in a country called South Africa. I was born to a very Jewish family. I was born to a family of leadership within the Zionist movement, a home in which they spoke Hebrew in South Africa, despite the fact that neither of my parents were Israelis. I was the first Jewish pupil in the first Jewish day school in South Africa. I grew up knowing that I'm a member of this Jewish tribe, and my whole life was filled as a child from the age of 0 till I left home at 16 and a half. My life was filled with an understanding of being a Jew is being a member of the tribe. And it was a very comfortable way of understanding being Jewish in South Africa, because I knew of no one in South Africa who was not a member of a tribe. Everybody was either a Dutchman, the Dutch tribe, or the English-speaking tribe, or the Jewish tribe. And if they were Black, they were a member of 21 different tribes that exist in South Africa. So tribal identity was very, very strong and very, very supportive of my understanding of my identity as a Jew. My home was very, very secular, but very, very Jewish. My father was an atheist. He always used to say, I'm an atheist, Baruch Hashem, because being a Jew is difficult not to talk that way. But the rituals, the practices, the stories, the love for Israel. My earliest childhood memory was as a 4-year-old coming home from school walking into the house and seeing my father sitting next to a very old radio in the dining room, crying with tears running down his eyes. I ran to my mother and said, "Why is he crying? Why is Abba crying?" And my mother answers, with joy, they've just decided to partition Israel into a Jewish state and an Arab state. And soon there's going to be a Jewish state. And from that moment on, this concept of the Jewish state was central to my identity as a member of this Jewish tribe. South Africa was not my permanent home. It was my present home. I was a member of this tribe, but now this tribe was returning to its traditional homeland. And I knew that one day I'll be going back to there. There was one trip. I came with a good sense of Jewish identity. I knew I was, as I said, a member of this tribe. I arrive in Israel, and for the first time, I meet a phenomenon I'd never met before. I met an Israeli. I met an Israeli identity. I met Jewish nationalism. I was shocked by it. They didn't have the same tribal feeling that I had in South Africa. My first day in the state of Israel, all of my family who had come to meet me at the airport lived on 2 kibbutzim. Half of them lived in the south, in a kibbutz called Kibbutz Lahav. The other half lived in a kibbutz in the north called Kibbutz Mizrah. Kibbutz Lahav is the largest pig breeding kibbutz in Israel. And Kibbutz Mizrah is the largest producer of pork sausages in the entire Middle East. My first day of meeting a totally secular Israeli, deeply committed to his being Israeli, but really not very concerned about the Jewish community of the diaspora, was a total shock to me, because I was in Israel. I'd never been told. I came to Israel because my father said to me, the day I finished high school, "That's it, Avraham, goodbye. You're a Jewish youngster. There's a Jewish state, go." And I flew to a Jewish state that my father, in his secular terms, called the Jewish state. I arrived in the land of Israel. I get taken around the kibbutz. I come to the pigsty. Even though I was not religious, I never imagined that I would find the first thing I would meet in Israel would be a pig. I turned to my Israeli cousin and I said to her, "I'm so surprised." And I was blown away by her response, which was, "Avraham, it was so important to be Jewish in South Africa. But now you've come to Israel. You can stop being Jewish. You can become an Israeli." It was a total reawakening of my meeting with something that I hadn't really expected to find. Now you can become an Israeli. You can stop being Jewish. That bothered me. It bothered me, and I went on a world of searching to find an understanding for myself. What does it mean to be a Jew? There was a second trip. My third trip was many years later. I arrived in the United States of America, and for the first time I come across an axiom that says Judaism is a religion. I arrive in the United States of America. I'm traveling down the New Jersey Turnpike. I see a massive sign which says on it, "Families who pray together, stay together." This sign is sponsored by the Council of Protestants, Catholics, and Jews. And I almost had an accident. I didn't understand that sign. And for the first time, I came across a society in which Judaism is clearly understood as a religion. But I know that it's not a religion. My father was an atheist. I had already become a traditionally practicing Jew, but I never defined Judaism as a religion. Judaism was the culture of the Jewish people. And the more I began to work with the Jewish world, the more I realized the extent in which different Jews in different parts of the world defined their being Jewish in very, very different ways. That was the trip that I took. it brought me insights that I had to deal with. What really is this thing called being Jewish? How did this happen? How did Jews get these different insights into what it means being Jewish? We are so different from each other. What are we going to do about it? And on May the 14th, 1948, a gentleman with an amazing haircut, David Ben-Gurion, gets up in Tel Aviv. The British mandate has just ended that morning. And David Ben-Gurion is about to announce the creation of the state of Israel. He gets up and he makes the statement, not I hereby declare the creation of the state of Israel, but I hereby declare the creation of a Jewish state to be known as Israel. Wow. How confusing can this be? What are we going to do about the fact that if this is a Jewish state and Jews define being Jewish in so many different ways, we have a problem coming to an understanding of what Israel really is. So that was the journey in my life that brought me to deal with the subject that I've dealt with for the last 60 years.
You know, I clearly remember the first time I heard you use the words that we need to be unified but not uniform. It struck a chord with me. Can you please tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
I think that's the issue that is the central issue that the Jewish world has to deal with, because of something that happened to the Jewish world that brought about these changes in understanding and the self-identity of being Jewish, and the ways in which different Jews define their being Jewish differently. We are definitely not uniform. And I don't think we're ever going to be uniform. I don't know how many of you people listening to me today remember the film E.T., that little thing from outer space. I've often wondered what would have happened. He came from outer space to Earth, and the whole film was his coming into contact with strange things and then reporting home. And I've always been driven by this question: what would have E.T. said after he met Jews? Who are they? What are they? Why are they so different from one another? What is this nonsense about being a religion? If there's a Jews are a religion, why was it so important to have a state? There's no religion in the world that has a state. There are many states that have a religion, but there's no religion that has a state. Israelis regard themselves as members of this Jewish nation that have become Israelis. Zionism set out to turn the Jewish people into a Jewish nation in the same way as the French people had become the French nation, in the same way that the Italian people had become the Italian nation. Zionism set out to create a place in which the Jew could cease being a member of the Jewish people, but become a member of the Jewish nation. Jews are not unified. We're not uniform. But both you and I know, Mike, from our experiences, that most of Jewish education has to be dealing with the question of, can we be unified? And that's where I came to the question, saying that the question I want to deal with is it possible for Jews to be unified without being uniform? And it's a very, very important question, because uniformity is over. Jews As you mentioned in your introduction to me, I was the president of Hillel. I traveled the Jewish world. It was a great job. It was an excuse to travel the entire world because there are Hillels all over the world. And if you're the president, you have to visit them. So I traveled around the world. And whenever I went to speak to Jewish students in whatever country it may have been, I carried a sign with me. And that sign was divided into 3 columns. Across the top of the columns, I wrote the word apples, oranges, bananas. On the second line, I wrote lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers. On the third line, I wrote shirts, jackets, pants. On the fourth line, I wrote the word Jew, blank, blank. And I asked Jews to fill in those 2 blanks. Throughout the Jewish world, I have 208,000 responses from American Jews. Mostly students, but not only students. And I've asked students to answer the question, fill in those 2 blanks. What is to a Jew like an apple is to an orange? The first line were all fruit. The second line were all vegetables. The third line were all clothes. What is this fourth line? Jew, what? Of the 208,000 responses I still have, Mike, that's not a sample. That's a big, big number. Over 205,000 wrote either Jew, Christian, Muslim, or Jew, Catholic, Protestant, clearly defining that Judaism is a religion, whether they believed in the religion or not, but understanding, and it was obviously the understanding of the non-Jew in whose midst they were living, that they are distinct from the others by their religion. I have 38,000 responses from Israelis. Not one. Not one of the 38,000 wrote either Jew, Christian, Muslim, or Jew, Protestant, Catholic. Almost all of them, after the word Jew, what do they write? Arab. Who's their significant other to the Israeli Jew? It's the Arab. Who are they at war with? The Arab. Who do they want to make peace with? The Arab. Who don't they want to make peace with? The Arab. He is their significant other. So in the second box, almost all of them wrote the word Arab. And then in the third column, they wrote crazy things like American, Italian, Frenchman. It's their nationalism. Wow. You do it with the Russians. Every single one of the Russians. I have, I think, 15 or 16,000 responses from Russian Jews. After the word Jew, they wrote the word Russian. They did not identify themselves as Russian. And then in the third thing, there are all kinds of other ethnic groups that existed in the former Soviet Union. It's amazing. Jews are not uniform. And we're not going to be uniform. But we need to be unified. We have to deal with 2 subjects. How did we get into this mess of being not uniform? And what do we do about trying to create being unified without being uniform?
You know, I'm going to turn the subject just for a minute to what I know is one of your very favorite subjects to talk about. After many, many years of people asking you to write a book, you finally did so about 3 years ago. In your book, which is beautifully called A Passion for a People, you talk about the possibility of, you talk about 5-legged table theory of Jewish identity. And that is a fascinating subject. And I'd like to ask you to share some of that theory with us now.
I'm happy to do that. I'd like to just take a moment to talk about how we got into this mess that the theory of the 5-legged table tries to get us out of. How did we get into this mess? Until about 270 years ago, Mike, anywhere you would have gone in the Jewish world, wherever you would have met a Jew and asked them what it means to be a Jew, you would have received the same answer. And that answer, whether it was in Iraq, Iran, North Africa, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Yemen, all Jews would have given you the same answer. To be a Jew is to be, first of all, a member of a thing called the Jewish people. These people were once upon a time slaves in Egypt. They left Egypt. They walked through a desert. This is the story we Jews told each other for over 2,000 years. We walked through a desert. We came to a mountain. The story tells us that at this mountain, we met with a being they called God. They signed a covenant with God. According to this covenant, he would be our God. We would be his people. This was very, very clear in their understanding. Every Jew until 270 years ago saw living outside of Israel as punishment. They called it exile. And they hoped and prayed that one day God would forgive them for their sins because they were exiled for committing sin. And they'd be forgiven and they'd be brought back by a Messiah to the land of Israel. Jews shared until 270 years ago, approximately, that understanding what it means to be a Jew, to be a member of a people. That's why I named the book A Passion for a People. I'm dying for us to become, again, members of one people. This people in Europe, where the vast majority of these people lived, are waiting for God to send a Messiah, and Europe changes. Modernity comes. And the Jew, for the first time, who spent all these years living in ghettoized life, meets with modernity, and he looks around him, and he looks at ways in which different people define themselves in different ways. And that impacts on the Jews. Because with modernity in Europe came the invitation to the Jew to stop being different. And the Jew had to respond to that invitation. We Jews, why are we Jews in a state of confusion today, the year 2022? Because different Jews gave different reactions to the invitation to stop being different. Why do we have Haredim in the Jewish world today? Because there were some Jews who said no to that invitation. Stop being ghettoized. Stop living in the ghetto. Become one of us. That's where the Haredim were born. They answered no, and they created the Haredi world. There was a second reaction. We said, yes. And that's where assimilation began. There was a third reaction which said, in my opinion, was the reaction of the majority, which said, you know what, Mr. Non-Jew? They're right. I can leave the ghetto. I can come live within your country. I can become citizens of your new states. I can speak your language. I can wear your clothes. I can go to your universities, but I can't leave my God. So you know what, Mr. Non-Jew? I'm going to become one of you, but I'm going to be different from you by religion only. And Judaism begins to be defined as a religion only 270 or so years ago. When the Jew says, I'm different from you by my religion. And a lot of interesting things happen when you say Judaism is a religion. First of all, you create religious denominations. Where was Reform Judaism and Conservative Judaism 300 years ago? They didn't exist. As a matter of fact, Mike, Orthodox Judaism didn't exist. You know, Mike, who was the first Orthodox Jew? The first Orthodox Jew was a Jew who met a Reform Jew. And then he said, oh, you're Reformer. That means I'm Orthodox. And then the conservatives squeezed in the middle. And In America, Jewish denominations define in many ways who we are as Jews. And then came Herzl, who was born to parents who tried to assimilate, grandparents who tried to assimilate, to parents who had assimilated, looked at the Europe he was living in and he said to them, you lied to us. You said to me, come and become one of us. Why is there still anti-Semitism? You know what, Mr. Non-Jew? I can't become one of you because you won't let me, but I'm going to become just like you. You have an anthem. You have a flag. You have a state. You apply to yourself the laws of modern nationalism. That's the way I'm going to be a Jew. I'm going to have an anthem. It's going to be called Hatikva, the hope, because it's going to be based on the hope that Jews had for one day returning to the land. I'm going to have a flag. It's going to be blue and white because that's the color of the talit in the synagogue. I'm going to have a state, and it's going to be the land that we've dreamt of. I'm not going to become one of you. I'm going to become just like you. You apply to yourselves in Europe the laws of modern nationalism. I'm going to apply to myself the laws of modern nationalism. And Zionism tried to turn the Jews into the Jewish people into a nation. They didn't succeed. You know why? Because some Jews were still in the ghetto. Other Jews were still assimilating. Many, many Jews thought that Judaism was a religion, but mostly because not all Jews lived in Europe. And the Jews who came to Israel from the Oriental countries didn't come because of modern nationalism. They came with a deep inner feeling that the land of Israel is a part of their being Jewish. Now that's created a confusion in the Jewish people. We don't know who we are. How am I supposed to expect, as a president of Hillel, a massive organization on over 1,000 campuses in the world, how the heck am I supposed to expect Jewish students to be out there supportive of Israel when my predecessor tells them that Judaism is a religion? They don't know about being a people. They weren't told that they're a people. The people who worked for me running the different Hillels were mostly rabbis of all of the different denominations. What is their link to the state? All of these things of being Jewish come back to that being a people. And that is why I developed this dream of a five-legged table. My late father used to talk to me about 5 legs of being Jewish. And by chance, one day I was in a carpentry shop. The carpenter was making a table. He was making a table with 5 legs. I said to him, this table of 5 legs? Why? He said, because a table with 5 legs is very strong. It's very sturdy. But I knew that if all Jews would accept the same 5 legs of being Jewish, we would be uniform. And that's not going to happen. And yet I want to be unified. So I said, what happens? Can it stand on 4 legs? He said, sure, it can stand on 4 legs. I said, can it stand on 3 legs? The carpenter said, of course it can stand on 3 legs. He said, can it stand on 2 legs? He said, no, it'll triple over. And suddenly I realized that my father's theory of the 5-legged table, of the 5 legs of being Jewish, was just like this carpenter's table. If we have 5, that's great. 4, we can exist. 3 is also a possibility. But if you only choose 2 legs out of 5, there's a possibility that you will have nothing in common with other Jews. So if I want to be unified without being uniform, I have to create a Jewish education which talks about the 5 legs of being Jewish and say to Jews, you're not going to make the choices I made. You didn't live my life. You've lived your life. You're who you are. You choose 3 out of the 5. Because if all Jews chose 3 out of 5 legs, we Jews will always have something in common with other Jews. We could be unified without being uniform. And very quickly, those 5 legs are Jewish memory. I remember, I come from a long line of very famous physicists. I went to study physics at the Hebrew University. On the first day of school, I'm looking out of the window in the lab, and I see a young lady I'd met at a party a few weeks earlier walking towards the history department. I ran out of the lab, ran after her, and I eventually graduated in history instead of in physics. She's now the great-grandmother of my great-grandchildren. You know him, Mike. But I have to let my father know. So I write my dad a letter. I said, Dad, I'm not going to study physics. I'm going to devote my life to the study of Jewish history. I get back a telex from my father. I can see the size of the letter. I know that he's furious. He says to me, what? The Hebrew University of Jerusalem teaches Jewish history? Jews don't have history. There's no such thing as Jewish history. Jews have memory. What's the difference between history and memory? History is knowing what happened in the past. Memory is asking yourself, who am I because of what happened in the past? And that is why the verb that appears more in our tradition than any other verb is the verb liskor, zachor, zecher, remember, remember, remember. In my understanding of being Jewish, what is the purpose of being Jewish, of Jewish education? The purpose of Jewish education is to take the single individual Jew and help them link their own very important personal memory to the collective memory of the Jewish people. That's why memory and a link to Jewish memory is the first leg of being Jewish. The second link is, who are we, Mike? Who are these people? You know, there used to be a bank in New York City. I hope you remember it. The Chase Manhattan Bank. They used to have a slogan. They've already had the same slogan for 73 years. We said, you have a friend at Chase Manhattan. Mike, it costs a fortune, but you have a friend at Chase Manhattan. It's an ad every kid in New York knew. You have a friend at Chase Manhattan. Cost you a fortune, but you have a friend at Chase Manhattan. When Bank Discount of Israel opened their first branch, they came out with a phenomenal ad. The ad said as follows. You heard it for an entire year. Every 4 hours on local radio, every 4 hours on local TV, every hour on local radio, you heard this ad. We said, you may have a friend at Chase Manhattan, but we're mishpocha. We're family. And they hit the nail on the head. You know who the Jews are? We're a family. You know that we're a family, Mike, because we're always fighting, like any good family. Why do you have fights in a family? Because you care what a member of your family said. He said it, so what? You said it? But much more than that. I came across for the first time in America this crazy meeting with something that's called a converted Jew. I meet converted Jews. I go give a lecture. This is in the late 60s. I'm giving a lecture. And at the lecture, 3 young ladies come up to me and said, we just wanted you to know we're converted Jews. I said, really? Why did you leave us? They said, no, we joined you. I said, what do you mean you joined us? She says, we converted to Judaism. I was shocked. You know that by Jewish law, you are not allowed to remind a convert that they're a convert. You know why you're not allowed to remind a convert that they're a convert? The same way as you don't remind adopted children that they're adopted. Once they're members of the family, they're a family. And if you look, the word giyur, which is the Hebrew for conversion, has nothing to do with conversion. The word giyur comes from lagur, to live with. Somebody who shares your fate. Somebody who comes and says, I'm going to become a part of your family. Adopt me. I'm on a crazy, wild crusade to get people who so-called converted to Judaism to start talking about themselves as adopted Jews, not converted Jews. You can't convert to a people. But there is a phrase in Judaism called a converted Jew. You know who's a converted Jew? Somebody who converts out. He thinks he's a Catholic. Have I got news for him? According to Jewish law, he's called a Yehudi Umar. He's a converted Jew. He doesn't cease to be a Jew. You know why? Because how do you join a family? You're either born into it or you're adopted by it. How do you leave a family? You don't. You may think you have, but ask the family. That's why the second leg is to teach Jews from the earliest age that they're part of this Jewish family, with whom I fight, with whom I argue, with whom I debate. But I'm a part of that family. And I have a commitment to that family. And leg number 3, I'm doing this very quickly. If memory is important to this family, we have to remember that our earliest memory is not that we left Egypt and suddenly landed up in Tel Aviv. We stopped somewhere on the way. We stopped at a place called Mount Sinai. And I don't care how Jews interpret Mount Sinai as conservative Jews, Reform Jews, Orthodox Jews, even secular Jews. But you can't ignore Mount Sinai, because in Mount Sinai, this Jewish people printed their visiting card. So the third leg of being Jewish is that whole world that comes from the meeting between the Jewish people and God at Mount Sinai. There's only one of 5 legs. The first was memory. The second one was family. The third one is Mount Sinai. And we're getting close to the end of this, Mike. The fourth leg. I'm sorry, there's a 4A and a 4B. 4A is the land of Israel, and 4B is the state of Israel. They are not the same thing. The land of Israel, Mike, every inch of the land of Israel, every inch of all of the land of Israel is the warehouse of Jewish memory. Bibi, it's not only a political issue. It's not a question of annexation. It's not a question of settlements. It's not a question of giving up. All of the land of Israel is the warehouse of our Jewish memory. And the funny thing is, for the thousands, over 1800 years where there were no Jews living in this land, it was still the warehouse of our memories. It's not a political issue. You know why? Because the land of Israel simultaneously lives in 2 places. It lives in the Middle East, but it also lives in the consciousness of the Jew. And you know that I always talk about how I know that. I grew up in South Africa. South Africa is a different hemisphere. The seasons are the other way around. But Jews in South Africa, Australia, South America start to pray for rain on a holiday called Sukkot, which always falls in October. I don't know anybody in the Southern Hemisphere who wants rain in October. But the Jews there are praying for rain in October. It's the wrong time of the year. And I used to get worried. I used to be a sportsman, and we had a big match. And my friends were praying for rain, and I didn't want rain. I ran to my dad. I said, I must stop them. I don't want rain. My father says to me, relax. Our rain doesn't fall in South Africa. Our rain falls in the land of Israel. Mike tried to grow up normal with an answer like that. No possible way. But being Jewish is not being normal. And leg number 4B is the state of Israel. This state which I deeply love, and you know very well that I don't always like it. I have a lot of criticism of it. I don't like my politicians. I don't like the drivers. I don't like there's a lot I don't like about Israel. But I don't love, there's not a moment in which I don't love Israel. I love Israel because this little state, when I was a kid, the noun that went along with the adjective Jewish more than any other noun was the noun refugee. Today, there's no such thing as a Jewish refugee. And we're talking about this while there's something going on in Europe and whereby government is trying to get out of bringing in refugees by calling the Jews from there refugees. No Jew is a refugee. A Jew who comes here is repatriated. He's not a refugee. We have a responsibility to those Jews because we built a state for them, but we also have a moral responsibility to bring in as many real refugees who are running away from being murdered and killed and bombed as is going on in Ukraine today. This little state I love because it removed the phrase Jewish refugee from the Jewish world. And the fifth leg, Mike, is the Hebrew language. I'm invited to the States. I'm giving a lecture there. They say to me, your lecture's only in the evening. You want to come to our school? I come to a school. I walk into a Jewish school in America on a Sunday morning for kids 10, 11, 12 years old. And what's the teacher doing? She's teaching these kids how to read a language they can't understand. Why would one ever want to learn a language you don't understand? And I'm suggesting, I know you know people who were involved in Jewish education, teaching kids Hebrew. I looked at the faces of these kids. I saw the suffering of my people. I called over one of the kids. I said to him, Timothy, that was his name, Jewish kid. I said, Timothy, why do you have to pray in Hebrew? He gave me the only answer I've ever heard that made sense. Because God doesn't understand English. Do we have a stupid God, Mike? God understands French and Arabic. We teach Hebrew because language is not only a way of communication. Language is a way of conveying concepts from one generation to another. Just one example, to fall in love. What is this nonsense, to fall in love? You know that you only have that phrase, to fall in love, in Christian cultures. Why? Because it comes from the cardinal sin of man in Christian theology. Passion is a sin. We don't fall in love. We say, how do you say to fall in love in Hebrew? Lehitahev. It's a unique grammatical form, hitpael. It's reflexive, it's give and take, it's a different idea of love. Those 5 legs, Jewish memory, Jewish family, Mount Sinai, the land of Israel, the state of Israel, and the Hebrew language. If any Jew, if all Jews would find a way of internalizing in their lives at least 3 out of those 5, we will create a Jewish world in which we are unified without being uniform. That's my big wish. That's the business I'm in.
That's great. I have one final question, and one question which was submitted to us beforehand by a member of the audience. My final question is, what do you see as the challenges and your dreams for the Jewish people?
I'm sorry?
What do you see as the challenges of the Jewish people and your dreams for them?
The biggest challenge of the Jewish people, number one, is to deal with this question of identity and help develop the concept of our being a people and learning and talking about being a people. Understanding that what a people is, it contains all of those 5 legs, but you can be a member of the people if you have only 3. And secondly, being willing to commit yourself to ensuring the continued significant renaissance of this people. It's an educational challenge. It's not easy. There's a lot to be done, but it's very important. We're living in a world which is cruel. Being a Jewish state, being a member of the Jewish people demands a certain kind of morality, a certain way of being concerned for the other, but recognizing that you are a member of your people. That's my dream for the Jewish people.
That's great. Let me go on and read the one question which was submitted in advance by Scott Lazansky, who you know as well. First of all, he says, thank you, Avram, for the book dedications, which will be a centerpiece of our Peoplehood Conference in Palo Alto later this week, that I'm going to as well. Question about peoplehood and diversity from Scott. You, Avram, are a Pied Piper for Jewish peoplehood, but there are naysayers who argue that the paradigm is outmoded, not sufficiently inclusive, and less relevant for an increasingly diverse American Jewish community. What is your message to skeptics, and why is the peoplehood paradigm particularly well suited for our times?
Don't be afraid of challenging questions. Don't make things superficial. You cannot understand Israel. You cannot understand being Jewish if you're looking for superficial answers. Help people relate to these subjects seriously and with sophistication. If we can get to do that, we can make this a much better world for the Jews and for everyone. I believe that we Jews have a real responsibility. I have a dream, Mike. I have a dream that one day the Jewish people get a Nobel Prize for Tikkun Olam. That we as a people have managed to fulfill the responsibility of making this a better world for all. That's what I'd like to see us achieve.
Avram, thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your time. And I'm sure everybody on the call will learn and absorb from your wisdom.
I thank you very much for inviting me to be on this Mirage discussion. And I thank you for the interview.
Avram, thank you, sir, so much on behalf of Paul Mirage for enlightening our tribe and people. It was fascinating, and I'm sure many more people will watch this recording, and it will be lucky enough to hear you. And if they have any questions, we'll make sure they get to you.
Yeah, Eddie, please, if there are questions, please send them to me. I'll be more than happy to respond.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Ali.